notification came through at 7:14 in the morning, the day I was supposed to be celebrated. It was a text from my brother, just a screenshot, no words. A photo someone had taken of me at the podium the night before, my face mid-sentence, mouth open, eyes a little too bright from the stage lights, and underneath it a caption my brother had written in a group chat I wasn't part of. "Look at her, plain lawyer of the year. Dad built everything she used to get here and she can't even say his name in her speech." There were 17 replies in the thread. My mother had sent 3 laughing emojis. I sat on the edge of my bed in the Fairmont hotel room the firm had booked for me, still in the robe, holding my phone with both hands. Outside the window, downtown Vancouver was just starting to wake up. The harbor was flat and gray. I remember thinking how quiet it was. I remember thinking I should feel something other than this particular kind of cold. The award was the BC Law Society's Emerging Advocate Recognition. It goes to one lawyer under 35 in the province each year. I was 29. I had worked on the Hartley environmental case for 14 months of weekends, of 11 p.m. calls, of driving up to the Fraser Valley with a thermos of coffee and a recorder to sit with families who'd been watching their well water turn colors they couldn't name. We won. We won in a way that made the partners shake my hand with both of theirs. My name was in the Globe and Mail. My father had not called. He'd been present at the ceremony. My parents drove up from Kelowna. My brother flew in from Calgary. My sister-in-law sat next to my mother in the 3rd row. And I could see them from the stage when they gave me the plaque, and I could see my father's face. And what was on it was not pride. It was the look he gives at family dinners when someone brings up a topic he's already decided he's finished with. I'd noticed it, but I'd told myself I was reading too much into it. I'd told myself the way he barely touched his food at the dinner afterward, the way my mother kept redirecting every conversation, the way my brother made a joke about lawyers that landed like a stone. I'd told myself it was just the family being the family, that this was just what we were. But the screenshot at 7:14 in the morning told me something different. I called my best friend, Vanessa. She picked up on the second ring, even though it was a Saturday. I read her the caption. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Zoe, how long has this been going on?" I didn't have a good answer. The honest answer was, always. But I'd never had proof of the always before. I'd had feelings. I'd had a vague, persistent sensation that I was never quite landing right with my own family. Too ambitious, too serious, too much. My father had built a mid-sized construction company in the Okanagan, Thatcher Contracting, and he had groomed my brother from the time he was 12 to take it over. I had wanted to be a lawyer since I was 9 years old. Those two facts had never been in conflict as far as I was concerned. As far as my father was concerned, apparently, they had always been. I didn't go home for Christmas that year. I told them I had a case. I did have a case, which made the lie easier to carry. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing yet, was that around that same time, my father was in a meeting with a man named Dale Forsyth. Dale Forsyth was the managing partner at Birchmount & Cole, one of the larger firms in Kelowna. He and my father had been playing golf together since I was in high school. I knew his name. I didn't know that my father had walked into his office in early January and sat down across from him and said, more or less, that he had concerns about his daughter's conduct. I found out about the meeting 8 months later. By then, a lot of other things had already happened. In March, a file went missing from my office. Not physically, digitally. A background research document I'd built over 3 months for an upcoming case involving a logging company's use of Crown land up near Prince George. It was proprietary work, nothing that had been filed anywhere. One morning it was there. The next morning the folder was empty and the backup showed it had been accessed and cleared from a personal device connected to the firm's network 2 nights before. The IT department flagged it. They brought it to the senior partners, not to me. That was the first thing I found out secondhand, from a junior associate named Priya who sat 2 offices down and who told me over lunch one day with the careful tone of someone delivering bad news slowly. "They're being weird about it," she said. Like, who had access, what the motive was. Who had access? I said. Well, technically, the guest Wi-Fi log shows it was accessed from a device that connected to the guest network. She paused, and that network logs names when people sign in, for security. I looked at her. The name in the log, she said, was Grant Thatcher. My brother had visited me at the office exactly once in the last 2 years. He'd come down from Calgary to Vancouver for a long weekend in February. I'd given him a guest pass for the building so he could use the cafe on the main floor. I hadn't thought anything of it. I drove home that evening and I sat in my apartment on Cambie Street and I thought about my brother visiting my office. I thought about my father's construction company, which had, in the past several years, branched significantly into resource development, forestry contracts, crown land applications. The logging company, whose file had just been emptied from my system, was a company my father had done preliminary site prep work for, twice, up near Vanderhoof. I picked up my phone and then I put it back down. I knew how this worked. I was a lawyer. I knew that what I had was not evidence. What I had was a name in a Wi-Fi log and a terrible, hollow feeling in the center of my chest that I recognized from childhood as the specific sensation of realizing you had been trusting someone who had decided, long before you found out, that your interests and theirs were simply not aligned. I called Vanessa again. I told her what Priya had told me. She said, "Okay, what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Yes, you do," she said. She was right. I did know. I just needed to be willing to do it. I started quietly. I didn't tell anyone at the firm what I suspected. I went back through every case I'd worked in the past 2 years, and I made a list of any file that had overlapping territory, geographically, industrially, legally, with Thatcher Contracting's known bids and contracts. It took me 6 weeks of evenings. I found 4 cases. In 2 of them, opposing counsel had come to the table with information that, at the time, I'd assumed was parallel research. Looking back, with different eyes, it was too specific, too targeted, the kind of specific that means someone told you where to look. I submitted a formal request through the firm to the Law Society of BC to begin a confidential review. I didn't name my father. I named the pattern. The review opened quietly in late April. What the investigators found and what they told me about in a bare conference room on a Tuesday morning in June, with a compliance officer and a senior partner present, was more organized than I had imagined. Over approximately 18 months, someone with intermittent access to my working files had been passing summary documents to Dale Forsyth's firm, not the full files, just the strategic frameworks, the research angles, the arguments I was building before I'd built them. Forsyth's firm had represented opposing interests in 3 of my cases. In one of them, a water rights dispute in the South Okanagan, the opposing brief contained a line of argument so similar to my unpublished research notes that the investigator called it, in the flat language of compliance reports, a notable correspondence. The access points trace back to 2 places: my brother's device, used on the guest network, and one other, a login registered to a consulting account that had been used twice on my firm's external portal, an account created under a business email from Thatcher Contracting. My father had a login to my firm's client portal. I had set it up for him myself, 3 years earlier, when I'd done some basic incorporation work for a small subsidiary of his company as a favor. I had forgotten to close the account when the engagement ended. He had not forgotten it was there. I sat in that conference room and I kept my face completely still. I am good at that. Years of courtrooms will do that for you. But under the table, my hands were pressed flat against my thighs and I was thinking about my father sitting in the 3rd row at the ceremony, and the look on his face and my brother's text and 17 laughing emojis, and the sound of my mother's voice every Christmas redirecting every conversation, and I understood, in the way you sometimes understand things that have been true for a long time before you named them, that this had not been an accident or an impulsive decision. This had been a choice, made deliberately, made more than once. My father had been sabotaging my cases, passing my work to a competing firm, potentially costing my clients, People like the families in the Fraser Valley with the well water, people with no resources and no recourse except the law, real outcomes, real money, real protection they deserved. For what? Because I hadn't said his name in his speech? No, I didn't think it was really about the speech. I thought it was about the fact that I had left, that I had chosen a life that didn't need him in it, that I had become, in his view, the daughter who didn't owe him anything. And he had decided, without ever saying so out loud, to collect what he felt he was owed. The Law Society investigation escalated in July. It moved beyond a civil review into a referral to the RCMP's Commercial Crime Unit. My father hired a criminal defense lawyer out of Vancouver, not from Birch Mountain Coal, obviously. And I know because Vanessa called me the evening she'd seen his car in the parking lot of that firm's building on Georgia Street, where she worked as a paralegal 2 floors up. "Zoe," she said, "he's actually going through with it." Going through with what? Defending himself. He's retained Calloway. Avery Calloway was one of the best criminal defense lawyers in BC. The fact that my father had retained her told me everything about how seriously he was now taking this, which told me everything about how serious it actually was. My brother called me in August. It was the first time we'd spoken since Christmas of the previous year. He called from a number I didn't recognize, and when I picked up, there was a pause before he spoke, like he'd expected voicemail. "Zoe," he said. "I know," I said. Another pause. "Dad's lawyer says." "I know what Dad's lawyer says." "This is going to destroy the company." I thought about the families in the Fraser Valley. I thought about the water rights case in the South Okanagan. I thought about a woman named Ellen, a retired schoolteacher who had sat across from me in her kitchen and shown me a jar of water she'd collected from her tap, and how the color of it had been wrong in a way that was hard to describe, and how she'd looked at me when I told her we were going to fight, like I was something she'd stopped expecting. "I know," I said to my brother. "Is that all you have to say? What would you like me to say?" He didn't have an answer for that. We stayed on the line for a few more seconds, then he hung up. The RCMP investigation concluded in October. My father was charged with breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized access to computer systems, and 2 counts of obstruction related to ongoing legal proceedings. My brother was charged with 1 count of unauthorized access. The charges were real, they were public record. The announcement went through the business section of the Kelowna Daily Courier on a Wednesday morning, and by Thursday it had been picked up by the Vancouver Sun's business desk. Theatre Contracting lost 2 municipal contracts within the month. The bank called in a review on their operating line of credit. By November, the company was in creditor protection. My mother called me. It was the first time she'd called me, not texted, in over a year. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was 4 minutes long, and the tone of it was not apologetic. The tone of it was the tone she uses when she is angry but has decided to frame it as concern. She said I had to understand what I had done to this family. She said she hoped I understood the weight of what I was carrying. She said that my father was not a bad man. He was a flawed man. And that there was a difference, and that I, as a lawyer, should understand that difference better than anyone. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. I want to be honest about something, because I think dishonesty here would be its own kind of betrayal. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel the clean, uncomplicated satisfaction that I think people expect when they hear a story like this. What I felt was tired and something adjacent to grief, and a strange, persistent discomfort with my own certainty, not doubt about whether I'd done the right thing, but discomfort with how long it had taken me to see what had been there the whole time. I had given my father access to a portal. I had given my brother a guest pass. I had told myself, every Christmas, every phone call, every family dinner that landed wrong, that I was probably reading too much into it. I had extended so much benefit of the doubt that by the time I stopped extending it, the damage was already significant. That is not self-blame, I want to be clear about that. What they did was their choice and only theirs. But there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing how much energy you spent, over how many years, choosing to believe the more generous interpretation of people who had never, not once, extended you the same courtesy. In January of this year, I was offered a partnership at the firm. It came earlier than anyone expected, and my senior partner, when he told me, said something I've been thinking about since. He said, "You handled a very difficult situation with a lot of integrity. That matters here." I thanked him. I meant it. In February, Thatcher Contracting went to receivership. The assets were liquidated. The commercial property my father owned in Kelowna, the yard, the equipment storage, the small office building he'd been renting out for supplemental income, went to auction in March. I bought the office building. I know how that sounds. I want to explain it because it wasn't a power move, or not only a power move, or maybe it was, and I have made my peace with that. I bought it because I had decided to open a small access to justice clinic in Kelowna, operating out of my firm as a satellite office, a place where people in the interior, people without the resources to retain downtown Vancouver lawyers, people like Ellen with her jar of water, could get real legal help without driving 5 hours or paying $250 an hour. The building needed work. It needed new floors and better lighting and a waiting area that felt like somewhere you'd be willing to come back to. I hired a contractor, a small company out of Penticton, not Kelowna. That choice was deliberate. The clinic opened in April. I drove up for the first week and I sat in the front office and I talked to people, and it was the thing I most wanted to be doing, and the building was my father's building, and I had bought it at auction with my own money, and I thought about that during the drive home, the long way along the lake, watching the light on the water go from afternoon gold to something flatter and quieter. Vanessa texted me when I was halfway down Highway 97. She said, "How was it?" I thought about how to answer. I thought about the woman who came in on Thursday morning with a lease dispute, and the young guy on Friday afternoon with an employment issue he'd been afraid to bring to anyone, and the way the front room looked with actual plants in it, green things that I had put there myself before the first day. "Good," I wrote back. "Really good." She sent back a single emoji, a small flame. I put my phone down and drove the rest of the way home with the windows open and the evening coming in off the Okanagan, and I let myself have it. Not triumph, not vindication, but something quieter than both of those. The particular satisfaction of having built something real in the wreckage of something that should have loved you better and choosing to make it useful anyway. There's an image I keep coming back to. My father sitting in the third row at the ceremony, and the look on his face, not anger, not even disappointment, just that flat, finished expression, like I was a subject he'd already closed the book on. I kept telling myself I was misreading it. I kept extending the benefit of the doubt like it was something I owed him by default. That habit, the one where you choose the generous interpretation over and over, long past the point where the evidence has stopped supporting it, I think that's what I actually had to unlearn. Not because trusting people is wrong, but because there's a difference between trust and willful blindness. I had confused the two for most of my adult life when it came to my own family, and that confusion had real consequences. Not just for me. For Ellen and her jar of discolored water, for the young guy who came into the clinic on a Friday afternoon, too afraid to tell anyone what had happened to him at work. My blind spot had a radius. What I understand now is that integrity isn't only about the big moments, the decision to report, the choice to cooperate with an investigation, the willingness to watch your own father get charged. It's also about the small, quiet decisions that happen long before any of that, whether you close an access portal when an engagement ends, whether you notice the thing that feels wrong and say something instead of talking yourself out of it, whether you let the discomfort of a situation land on you fully instead of smoothing it over because smoothing it over is easier. My father was intelligent. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it carefully over 18 months, through a back door I had left open myself. That's the part I have to sit with, not guilt. I didn't create his choices, but a real reckoning with the cost of not paying attention. The cost of assuming that people who are supposed to love you are, by definition, not acting against you. What got me through wasn't certainty. Most of the time, I was not certain at all. What got me through was the willingness to stay in the discomfort long enough to find out what was actually true, and then to act on what I found even when the acting was hard. That's something I had to build deliberately over years of courtrooms and difficult conversations and cases where the right answer was also the inconvenient one. It didn't come naturally. It came from practice. The clinic in Kelowna is still open. I drove up last month and sat in the front room with the plants I put there myself, and a woman came in with a landlord dispute and we talked for an hour. And when she left, she looked the way Ellen had looked across the kitchen table, like something she'd stopped expecting had shown up anyway. That's what I bought the building for, not to make a point, to make it useful. There's a difference, and most days I believe I found it.